Hi, this is Ninja2Dan again with another quick video guide for 7.62 high caliber. And in this video, I'm just going to be giving a couple of basic pointers that have to do with some of the game features. First off, we can go ahead and cover some of the looting. As you're probably aware, after your first couple of engagements, when you are done in combat and you have dead bodies, you see their equipment on the ground. Another thing that some people actually do not know is that as you look over the maps, which can be pretty decent in size, there are going to be several containers that are able to actually hold loot itself. So it doesn't matter if the game is paused or not, as long as you have a character selected, moving your cursor over these different items, if you see the hand with the finger pointing to it, that means that that container can be looted. Doesn't mean there's anything in it, but it means that you can actually go and try to put things in it or take things out. So as we can see here, this dumpster seems to have something in it, and so do some of the boxes over on this side of the building. Most of these portions I've already looted, and a civilian wants to stand in the way. Oh. I'm just going to get rid of dumbass. So when you go to a dumpster or other container, when you click on search, you'll then be able to search through it. Obviously, because these have had everything pulled out of them, nothing's going to show up. But if you simply click on one of those containers, start going through it, you can actually find some pretty interesting loot. Sometimes it'll just be just basic junk, like an old pistol. Other times, though, you can actually find some really cool items such as books, vests, things you might need or just might want to sell for a little bit of extra cash. So whenever you go into a sector for the very first time, it's always a good idea to just go ahead, keep the game paused. If it's not already, pause it. Get a little bit of a zoomed out view. Pay attention to your mini-map, and I would generally just go to one of the edges of the screen and start basically going yard to yard. Try to follow a grid pattern so that you don't keep going through the same area more than once, but just start using the mouse cursor to go over anything that looks like it might be a possible container. So that would include dumpsters, trash cans, even vehicles. So again, as we saw with those, once the icon changes to the finger, you know that that can possibly have items that are stored in it. Other things might have it, such as some of these shipping containers might show the finger symbol on one of the doors. That can get a little bit tricky at times. Sometimes it means that the door can be opened. Other times the container itself can actually be searched. But you generally just want to go through the entire map, and as you start to see all these little boxes, containers, if you see some that look like they can be looted, definitely go, run, loot it. This is very important when you go to certain sectors that are temporary. So if it's a random encounter or a random mission, make sure that as soon as you're done killing everybody that you loot every container you can find, because some of those random or temporary missions, once you leave the sector, that's it, the sector is no longer available, so you only have that one opportunity to loot. So as you can see, even this vehicle is lootable, so try and go around and just loot everything you can possibly get. When you're looting, just like with anything else, you want to probably give your character a backpack so that if there's an item in a container, you can move it to the backpack. When the backpack gets full, you can then throw it into the trunk. As you can see here, because of that civilian that got in my way, I shot him. He's dead. You can't really do much with the body. You can either right click and search the body, You can see what he has on him. This can take quite a while if you have a large amount of bodies. The other option is you have a button here that is remove bodies from the ground. I'll go ahead and kill off just a few more people. So that you can see what that looks like. Sorry about that. So now we have a few different dead bodies on the floor. So you can see any weapons that they had in their hands at that time are dropped on the ground. But the bodies themselves are just sitting there. Instead of having to right click on each individual body, if you hit so again, notice the bodies themselves are there. If I choose remove bodies, the bodies themselves will now disappear, and anything that they had on their person they were able to loot will then show up here. So now their bodies went poof, and all the stuff that they had is showing up. If you missed it earlier, by holding down the control button, any item that can be picked up will show up as like a yellow highlight. You can move the hand over it to pick it up, but if you're not in combat, it's easier just to press I and drag it to your inventory. Certain items such as belts, vests, and storage, you'll have to inspect them to see what is in their pockets. You can either drag the items out. Generally though, if I inspect something and I see that it just has garbage that I don't want, I just leave it in there. I guess somebody bled out. Or I cannot access the body. Yeah, I guess they got stuck. And as noted in one of the previous guides, yeah. If you're going through and you see items that you want to keep, for example, these magazines here are a full metal jacket, which I don't like, but these have the M885 cartridges, which are actually pretty decent to use. I'll go ahead and those with the good ammo, drag them into my cabin storage. Look at the body armor and see that it's damaged, so it's no good. Maybe grab a tape roll. Other than that though, if I don't want this, I just put the trunk. Now it'll move all that to the trunk so that I can sell it later on. So that's how you can go through and find a little bit of your extra equipment while you're looting, is to search all those containers. Another quick trick that somebody wanted me to explain is quick turning around corners. The way that works is if you have an enemy that is somewhere in this area, if you simply run around the corner, there's a chance that they might already be waiting for you, and before you can turn and fire, they might already be able to blast you. One of the other options that you have is, as long as you're in a standing position, when you get close to a corner, if you hold down your Alt key, it will say fast turn. So now you can see that by doing that, the character very quickly popped around the corner and had their weapon at the ready. I can show you it in one of the other corners. Oh, that's a bit odd. So, there's a bug for you. The dead person is somewhat there. Anyways, so again, say you're around the corner. You know that there's enemy around the other side. You can see that by just simply running to an area, the time that it takes to run to the area, turn towards the target, ready and raise your weapon, that could take a little while. The fast turn option, as soon as he comes around the corner, boom, his weapon is up and at the ready. If you think that you're going to take fire, hold down Alt again, and he'll pop back around the corner. This is an option that you have to reload your magazines, transition to a different weapon. So for example, if we needed to transition to a different weapon, you can do so while you're still behind cover. When he's done, fast turn, he immediately goes, readies his weapon again. So as you are coming along to different corners and you suspect that there might be an enemy there, it is generally a good idea to go ahead and do that. By using that fast turn option, you have the ability to increase your survivability just slightly. Another option is going to be turning towards the enemy. While you generally, if you left click, that's to tell him to move to that spot. If you hold down the shift key, you will see that the icon goes to turn. To understand what that does, by pressing either the field of view or field of fire or the F key, you will see section highlight. That's his field of view. This is his field of fire, where his weapon's able to fire. What's important though is his field of view. This is where this character can see enemies popping up. So if a character, an enemy, comes up on the side where he isn't able to see him, he's not going to be alerted. He might be dead. So obviously you're going to want the characters on your team to point in directions where you want them to watch. This game does not have an actual overwatch or guard mode. They will not automatically engage the enemy for you. What you will probably want to do is when you go into your settings, go to Game and Events. This was covered in an earlier guide. You have different options for the pause menu. If there's a new enemy that is spotted, you can tell the game to pause. What that means is if your character is watching a sector and an enemy pops up, the game will pause, allowing you to react. So while there isn't an actual guard mode for them to fire on their own, the game will pause to allow you to tell them to fire. That way they aren't just standing there and they're getting shot up. The Alt key, if you're not doing corners, if you hold it to one side or the other, it will have him sidestep. In other words, strafe. If you do it behind the character, they will walk, crawl backwards. As far as stances, if you look on the section of the screen here, you'll see a variety of different stances. You have sprint, where they will move at their fastest speed possible. If they're overburdened with too much equipment, or if their energy bar has dropped too far, they will no longer be able to sprint. Run is the general setting that I always keep them on at all times. This is what will allow them to move at a better speed. Obviously they will make more noise. When you're going around town, it's going to be the best option. Walk is just that. It is a walk. It's slower, slightly less noise. These two options are going to be a crawl. So you have one that is a quick crawl, So as you can see, as he moves at a faster speed, but his body's up higher. The other is a lower crawl. It's not really a crawl on your knees, but so now you can see he moves slower and his body's not up as high. He'll make much less noise this way. The last option is the prone. One thing to note is that in order to go into the prone, you must have sufficient space around your character. For example, if we run right up next to this car, we try to go to the prone, it will not let us. There is not enough room. The only way you can go to the prone is if you have sufficient clearance around you. This is definitely obvious if you have multiple characters. And you're trying to set up a sector of fire. You cannot have your characters prone down too close to each other. So when you start setting up positions where you want people to move, you must remember they have to have a space between them. As long as that space is there, they will then be able to prone out. If that space is not available, the lowest stance they can get to is the low crawl. We've generally already covered some of the basics in the weapons guide as far as the different firing modes. So as noted before, some of your different fire modes, the options that are available will be dependent on your stance. So for example, the fire from the hip option is no longer available once you're in the crouched or prone. For certain weapons such as sniper weapons, as you can see, while he is in a standing position, he cannot do a fire stance. Or actually, I should use my machine gunner for that. So with the machine gunner, because he has a heavier weapon system, when he is standing up, the only fire option that he has with this weapon is going to be hip shoot. Once he gets down to a kneeling or prone position, he can then instead use more accurate snapshot or aim fire. So again, that is something to take into consideration. Your stance is going to really affect your aim mode capabilities. As far as what stance does, it's not only going to be the speed at which you travel, but it's also going to affect how easy it is for the enemy to engage you or to spot you. One trick is if you are in the enemy's area or you think you might be engaging the enemy soon, one button that you see here is showing weapon up. Shortcut is P. You should become very familiar with them. What that means is the character will place the weapon in the up position. To explain what that does when it is not on, if you have your character go ahead and fire at an enemy. So here we'll just have him take one shot. So now he has fired a shot, his weapon is now up and at the ready. If I tell him to look in a different direction, he lowers his weapon. If I tell him to move, he lowers the weapon. Sometimes you do not want him to lower the weapon because we all know it takes more time for him to get the weapon up and ready before he fires. If the weapon is already up and you press P, you will not see anything change at that point. If his weapon is lowered, you will see him raise the weapon without actually aiming it. As you can see, is while that weapon is up and in a ready stance, anytime that the character moves, they move with that weapon at the ready. So if they do need to fire, as you can see here, it only takes 0.45 seconds. If he's not at the ready, it will take 2. So it's definitely something that if you go, you fired an enemy, you miss, or if he's dead, you suspect there might be more down the road. Before you do anything, press P to lock him into that stance of holding the weapon up. You're then able to have him turn if you need him to turn. If you want him to change stance, he will lower his weapon while he is changing his stance, but then he'll immediately raise it back up. The only time that this is going to knock itself out is if you are shot. If he's hit, he will then lose his ready stance. If there's a concussion or an explosion too close, he will lose his ready stance. If he has to reload, he will lose his ready stance. At any other time, though, his weapon should stay up and at the ready. One thing that you do also need to be aware of is that, as you can see here, your general sector of view is going to be close to a 45-degree angle. If you're using magnified optics, it will narrow their view. So as you start to look around, because his weapon is not at the ready, because he's lowering his weapon, they revert back to using their normal eyes. On the other hand, though, if their weapon is at the ready, every time they look around, they're still looking through their optic. Their view will be narrowed. While this is good for a sniper to do, because it greatly decreases the amount of time it takes for him to acquire and fire, with the general purpose weapons, anything basic, it's usually a good idea to not use the scope unless absolutely necessary. Or if you were using the scope and you were locked into that view, simply unready and re-ready your weapon. You'll then go back to your larger field of view. One thing you might want to note also is that the amount of time that it takes to get into the different stances can take a while. If you are in a low crouch, weapon at the ready, you're engaging the enemy and a grenade comes into your, not on top of you, but close by. Generally the two options you would have are to just immediately get up and try to run or fast crawl out of the area. The other option that some people don't think about is simply get into the prone. If the weapon is, if the grenade lands really close, get the hell out of there. Even if the shrapnel doesn't get you, the concussion blast will. So it can still stun you, injure you, knock you unconscious, even if the fragments don't get you. On the other hand, though, if the grenade lands not too close, but close enough that the shrapnel can get you, it usually might be faster to just get down to the prone position. When you're close to the ground, there's less likelihood that those fragments are going to come up and get you. If you were to instead try to turn and run away, there's a chance that once the grenade detonates, those fragments traveling at a much higher velocity might catch up to you and actually hit you while you're running away. It takes a little bit of practice and generally just common luck to determine which is going to be the better option. I'm trying to think of other factors. As far as night, as you can see, it is already starting to turn into night. During night, you'll start to see things like street lights. I can go ahead and accelerate time a bit so you can see what it's like with a little bit more darkness. So with the street lights, if you're in street lights, your visibility goes up, camouflage rating drops, so you're a lot easier to spot. On the other hand, if you move into a darker area, you'll start to see that your visibility drops only slightly, but your camouflage increases quite a bit. This makes it a little bit easier for you to remain unseen by the enemy, but it also makes it more difficult for your troops to spot the enemy. If you have night vision, it's usually a good idea to kick it on. During the daytime, though, it's not needed. I'm not aware of night vision being used during the daytime. Can actually cause real stat problems, but obviously it can also, in some maps in certain areas, using the night vision can make it a little bit more difficult to see things. You should note that things like cars can explode. I do not know if it causes additional damage to your characters. One thing that some people I don't think have been aware of is that on certain buildings you will see ladders you can climb. You can actually climb up onto higher terrain in multi-floored buildings. You can go through and actually change the height inside the building. If you go up or down stairs or through different levels, you can change the height of your view. Windows can be seen through generally, and they can also be shot through. So as you can see here, we have a clear line of fire. Problem is, if we try to shoot the person, the type of glass is not allowing him to actually see out of it. This is one of those few different bugs. So as you can see, the game does have little aspects here and there that you need to be aware of. Even though he has a perfectly clear sight to it, he just simply says, oh, he can't see the target. On the other hand, if you're far enough away where our weapon doesn't clip through it, we've fired, shatter the glass. Now that we can see through the glass, we can fire and engage the enemy. Grenade blasts from the concussion wave will break glass. Grenade fragments can break glass. Weapons fire can break glass. So you can try to use that to your advantage. If you're on one side of a window, the enemy will still be able to fire through the glass and hit you. It's super magic enemy vision. For your characters, though, the first time that you're going to fire, you're going to have to fire in the general direction to break the glass. As far as that works, might have been covered as far as the weapons. By not having your cursor over an enemy, by right-clicking, you will see the icon to do a firing. Hold down your shift to raise or lower it. They will then fire at that spot. If you use the slash key, that is to aim. So if you want them to aim in a certain direction, get their weapon ready to fire, but not actually fire. They will do so that if an enemy does pop up there, as you can see, it will only take him 0.05 seconds. So he will immediately pull a shot off. This is very useful because, as I showed you before, the use of fast turn around corners. If there's an enemy around a corner, you see him, you start to get ready to fire at him, and right at the last second, the enemy pops around a corner. You don't see him, and your character sits there like, duh, where'd he go, George? You could go ahead and tell him to cease fire, but you can tell him to go ahead and aim at that point. What will happen is the next time that the enemy pops around the corner and is visible, you can go ahead and get a shot off instantly. So you can pretty much shoot the enemy before they even have a chance to get behind cover. There is a slight glitch where this will happen with just basic foliage. There have been times, for example, where I've had the enemy in a flat-out run. My character was going to fire their weapon at them, but the character went behind a tree or behind a bush, and for just a quick second there, they weren't visible anymore. If you tell your character to go ahead and try to shoot at something that they can't see, like you saw earlier with those shots, that little scope view with the question mark means that they can't see the target anymore. They'll just generally fire it around a direction. If you tell them to hold fire, they'll just stop. Once that target comes back into view again, if you go to tell them to fire at that exact same target again, it'll work just like I showed you, where the time to fire is only 0.05 seconds. So say the enemy was out running down the street, you were getting ready to fire, and the enemy went behind the vehicle. You can't see them for a good half second to a second. Your character will then tell you he can't see the target. If you tell him to hold fire, once that enemy, while still running, pops up again on the other side of the vehicle, as they're running, if you tell your person to re-engage that target, instead of it taking another 2 seconds or whatever to reacquire the target and to fire, it'll only take the 0.05 seconds. So there have been times where I've been aiming at a target and was getting ready to fire, lost vision, and then right when it came back, he fired within that half second, and I was able to get very, very accurate headshots with just, it's very precise, very fast. I don't think that was really an intended feature. It might just be a little bit of bug or oversight. But that's one of those other tricks. Another thing is, with the enemies themselves, if you go to highlight over them, you'll get the icon. If you hold down shift, this is where you can tell quickly what type of fire mode you want. So do you want seal shots, snapshots? So this is where you can tell it what type you want to use. So for example, if I wanted to go with a aimed shot, firing through round burst, I would choose this option. If I want to go with a sniping view, looking through the optic and fire one shot, if I want to fire the grenade launcher. So this is a little bit quicker way of doing it than having to go here, choose a different fire mode, and then go back over to your target. You can simply change here. So if I were firing precise shots one at a time and it just wasn't doing as much damage, or if I decide I want a better probability of hitting, I can then hold down shift and quickly choose to go to burst. That is, instead of having to go over here, change your options this way, and then move the mouse back over to that target. Another option is with melee strikes. I don't think I have covered this yet. If your character's primary weapon is a melee weapon, or if they use in their fists, when you go to select a target, the only option that you have is strike. They'll either use their fists or that melee weapon to attack the enemy. If you have any type of a firearm in your inventory though, if it is a standard enemy, just holding the mouse over them will give you the fire options. If it is an interactable enemy, you get the dialogue option first. You must first right click. But as you can see here, holding the icon over them simply tells you that you can fire at them. If you right click one more time, then you have the option to strike. That is where they will run up on them, buttstock to the head type thing. It is one option that you have, that if your weapon runs out of ammunition, or if it's a weapon with a very slow fire time, if you do come up on an enemy in close quarters, you might choose to go ahead and do a melee strike instead of simply firing at them. This is also something that, I don't know if it's a bug or glitch, but if the enemy is literally right next to you and you try to shoot at them, sometimes they can't hit them worth anything. Doesn't matter what fire mode you choose. One other option that I can show you with that same character. I don't think I have any left. Sorry, one of the other options, okay, there we have one, is that some weapons are able to accept a bayonet. With the bayonet on your weapon, when you choose the strike option, instead of just butt stroke to the face, they are now using the bayonet. So if any of you have seen a bayonet on a weapon and couldn't quite figure out how you're supposed to use it or why it was an option, that is how you use the bayonets. For certain weapons, bayonets are removables. For other weapons, bayonets are permanently attached. Again, your weapon does not have to have a bayonet. You can do the same thing if it's a pistol, shotgun, machine gun. Doesn't really matter. So for example, here we transition to a sidearm. You still have that strike option. You're more or less just pistol whipping them or going into a boxing type. So as you can see here from point blank range, we are firing at the enemy, but because the portion of the weapon that actually has the rounds come out, which is tip of the suppressor, because that is the point where your rounds exit, not where the barrel is, but it's at that end. As you can see, the bullet actually travels slightly upwards. Not really realistic, but that's the way it works. If the end of the muzzle happens to be sticking through something, it will still come out of that point. It's kind of buggy. One example is that you need to pay attention to. Say for example these are dead bodies and this character here happens to be the enemy. So as you can see, this person here is still alive. They are kind of clipping through these dead bodies and they have their weapon up. If I tell her to go ahead and take a shot because of where her weapon is, the rounds are exiting and simply impacting into the body. Let's see if I can actually get to a proper spot. Sorry, I wasn't quite prepared for this demonstration. Here on the other hand, you can see that because the muzzle end of the weapon is actually out of the corpse, out of the body, that character is now able to fire the weapon without a problem. Because the bodies are there though, if somebody else were to try and fire their weapon at them, those rounds will impact the dead bodies instead of that person. You'll find this actually happening quite a bit with the enemy, where if you're killing a lot of them in one certain spot, some of the other enemy might be hiding underneath or within some of those corpses. They're able to fire at your characters, they're able to hit your characters and can kill your characters. But when you try to return fire, your bullets are simply hitting dead bodies without injuring the other person. Doesn't matter what caliber you use, what fire modes you use, those bullets are going to be absorbed by that dead body. It does make it a little bit difficult. In situations like that, your options are going to be limited. The best option, in my opinion, is to go ahead and try and get a grenade to land as close as you can. That way the blast force will shove the dead bodies aside, or the person will see the grenade, freak out, and at least get up and try to move. That will give you a better chance to go ahead and try and engage the enemy. Probably going to go ahead and end the video with that real quick. If anybody does have anything else that they want to add or questions, go ahead and let me know. There are a lot of tactics that you're going to find personal preference. So don't be afraid to do a quick save, try something out. If it doesn't work, just do a quick load and keep on experimenting.